As you can see, this is a PlayStation Black disc. Cut number 1 contains computer data, so please don't play it. But you probably won't listen to me anyway, will you?
Unused content has existed since the first game, as ideas and concepts had to be removed due to time, hardware, and resource limitations. Simon Belmont, the official mascot of the series, was initially planned to be named Peter Dante, and was supposed to be able to whip in 6 directions. He was planned to wield a gun with silver bullets, garlic, and even stakes to defeat his enemies. Many of these ideas would appear in following games. A Bible and Excalibur weapon were planned for the game too. In the NES version, we can actually find a sprite for a Bible hidden in the code, alongside this odd cross-like weapon. In the MSX2 game Vampire Killer, Bibles would change merchant pricing, or even stop enemies from being able to spawn at the sides of the screen. Maybe they'd work the same way? While not in the code, there's been information revealed about a wolf transformation and a guardian spirit bird, both scrapped. This wolf transformation would have made your attacks more powerful, but wouldn't transform you into an actual wolf like in Symphony of the Night. As for the guardian spirit bird, pressing B would send the bird flying across the screen. This seems to be the basis of Maria Renard's main attack of chucking doves at her enemies. By digging into the game's code, we can find items like high heels, a coffee mug, a basket of puppies, and a love letter, seemingly items that would have raised your game score. From various developer interviews, we can access even more information which is never officially revealed in-game. The creator of the Castlevania series, Hitoshi Akumajou, did an interview a while back that gives us a lot of insight. You know the second phase of Dracula's boss fight? That's not Dracula. That's why Dracula's head comes off. He gets sent to Simon's quest. This thing is the incarnation of the Curse of Man, which is why Simon gets cursed after defeating him. This is Dracula's curse, not Dracula. This is why in Japan, Castlevania 2 is called Dracula 2, Seal of the Curse. Simon is trying to stop that thing from decaying his body. You may notice during the ending screen for Castlevania 1, the base of the castle still remains standing. This is completely intentional. According to the same article, the clock tower represents Dracula's heart, and will only move and stand when Dracula is alive. It breaks down because Dracula's not alive anymore. The game has a hidden song. The save select, that was only available in the FDS release, received a slightly modified remix. This was necessary to deal with the new sound system the NES used at the time. Of course, the NES version doesn't have saves, so it was unused. Vampire Killer, which released a month after the first game, began Castlevania as a game series. It is said that this game was what Castlevania 1 was supposed to be, a more puzzle-oriented game. The game has a giant overlay above it, and surprisingly, if you hack the game to remove it, there are lots of graphics behind it that have been fully made. These can't be seen by the player. Otherwise, there isn't much of interest to this game. Sorry to disappoint you. Named in English by Akumajou himself, the first Metroidvania in the franchise has a fairly mixed reception. Maybe some unused aspects of the game would have made it more appealing to gamers of today? Well, no. There is an unused enemy. Due to its palette, it was clearly meant for a mansion. It's a Frankenstein's monster type of enemy, and actually has an artwork which was brought to the public later in the Castlevania Anniversary Collection's ebook. Akumajou states that the towns were meant to be much more difficult. The zombies which breach the towns at night originally were planned to jump up and down. Code that gets reused by the werewolf enemy. Many devs found that this was too annoying, so they removed it. The game code actually has mention of a lost relic. In Castlevania 2, most of us know that the villagers blatantly lie to your face, among other general rudeness. One of these lies was given to Simon before the game begins, about the number of relics Simon actually needed to collect. There is a Dracula's Fang mentioned in one of the game's guidebooks. This would later appear in games like Harmony of Dissonance and even Symphony of the Night. A fully drawn sprite is found in the code. This fang is what Dracula uses to attack you, since this was a piece of him that Simon never burned away. Now let's get to the good stuff. The game has an unused ending. See, in the original Famicom release, you would be told how many days it took you to beat the game. This isn't present in the NES version. On NES, the game only checks if you pass 7 or 14 days in-game. 3 of the endings still persist, But on the Famicom Disk System, if you beat the game in exactly 69 days, you get this secret message. See you again. Not the greatest Easter egg of all time, but whatever. Turns out, the Simon's Quest logo on the title screen actually cuts itself off. Here's how it's supposed to look. Very subtle, but it's one of those things that once you know about it, you can't unsee it. Anyway, the game was supposed to have a collapsing bridge mechanic, like in Dracula 3, as well as wind, tornado, and more things that we'd never see. Not really unused, but something that can't be used is garlic in the Dracula boss fight. Upon entering the room, all your garlic gets removed. This probably has to do with the garlic's effect of stun-locking enemies. If you were able to just stun-lock Dracula, it would make for a pretty anticlimactic boss fight. The Famicom release for Simon's Quest is completely unused in the Anniversary Collection. In fact, it has never been re-released at all. You can go into the Japanese editions of the game, and Simon's Quest will be missing. Even the original Castlevania is missing too from the Japanese section, as it includes instead the 1993 re-release. You may wonder what's happening in the Japanese version of the Anniversary Collection. Well, the Japanese version of Simon's Quest isn't even advertised, it uses the English name instead. This has to do with the difficulty of emulating Famicom Disk System games. Castlevania III released after they stopped making Famicom Disk System games, using instead the cartridge-based Famicom. They had a much easier game to work with. Simon's Quest never had a Famicom port like the first game did. Since it was on more difficult hardware, they never bothered porting the game onto Wii Virtual Console, which is where the Castlevania collections take their games from. The infamous arcade game is quite the tragic tale, but we'll get to that later, since there's some unused sprites which are pretty cool. First, we have this Bible subweapon, again. Konami hates the Bible, apparently. It seems to have been replaced by the Cross subweapon. A graphic for Holy Water appears too. They replaced it with a hand grenade because, of course, a hand grenade makes so much more sense in 1691 Transylvania. Finally, we have the Beetle Danny. Say hi. He appears to be a dummy icon, and has two sprites, one of him being real small. Upon researching for this video, I found an interview in The Untold History of Japanese Developers by John Saponiak. One section of the article has an interview with Masaki Kukino, Haunted Castle's director. Turns out, he only started working on the game in the middle of its production, which is crazy since the game only had a development time of about 6 months. Turns out, the game was in a really bad state when he joined development. I worry how the game would have looked beforehand. Major changes were made in this rushed period, like the art, which is one of the best aspects of the game. There was very little contact with the previous Castlevania dev teams, explaining why it looks and feels so different. Similarly, it reveals to us that Akumajou was really the person who created the series. In the old days, it was rare that games would actually credit their developers, like how the Castlevania dev team also created Snake's Revenge. The reason that the difficulty was so high was due to the 6-month development time. They just didn't have enough time to balance the game in the first place. When the game went overseas, the American localization team decided to make the game even more difficult. What makes this worse is that you couldn't even add quarters to increase your life count. You get 1 coin which grants you 3 lives to beat the game. It is revealed that they did this so that you could only beat the game if you had enough skill, not because you had enough money. All in all, I don't think that Haunted Castle is actually as bad as people say it is. Konami just gave the team such a tight window to create it. It didn't have much of a chance. There was very little I could find on this game, but I did my best. These early Game Boy games didn't really use much in the first place. A poisonous spider enemy was planned, but it would only appear in Belmont's Revenge, minus the poison aspect. A versus mode was planned too. You'd be able to fight other players with a Game Boy Link cable. I feel like this was the basis for the Soleil boss fight in Belmont's Revenge. Anyhow, you can see Christopher standing on conveyor belts, something that never appears in the game. It also looks like there was a plan for you to be able to change the game's difficulty, making the game more accessible for players today. This is relatively unknown, but in the beginning, Dracula's Curse was meant to have 5 characters instead of 4. So, if you ever complain about Grant being forgotten, at least he appears in his own game. This can be found in an old promotional magazine for Dracula's Curse. As the wiki states, Vampire, who's a werewolf, was a concept only ever retouched on in Rondo of Blood. He was an enemy turned good by the power of friendship. He had a weak fireball attack, like Alucard, and could transform into a bat while in vampire form. Otherwise, he can perform Wolf Kick. Most of these ideas seem to be incorporated in Alucard's abilities, though Alucard also appeared in this promo. Since I don't speak Japanese, I can't really tell you what his powers were supposed to be. Maybe one of the 59 of you subscribed can help me out see what the difference is. In the code, we can see that there are graphics for melting subweapons. Maybe some subweapons would melt upon contact with fire. Oddly enough, this concept was never retouched upon in the future. Now, on to Trevor C. Belmont. His middle name has never officially been revealed. Thankfully, I've looked it up so you don't have to. The C stands for Christopher. This is why the adventure and Dracula's Curse are set to take place at the same time. They're supposed to be about the same character. We've already discovered that communication between Castlevania dev teams were limited at this time. So the discrepancy probably has to do with the fact that there was very little communication between both teams. On to unused enemies, the only one I could find was a toothy slime, which would suck out player health. Many of the unused weather effects from Simon's Quest appear here too, specifically rain and wind. Lightning technically does make an appearance in gameplay, as using a dagger during a lightning strike will cause lightning to come down onto the dagger and hit any enemy that makes contact with it. An unused mechanic was hitting certain objects to make them fall onto enemies. Unfortunately, instead it seems to be what Frankenstein does to you. Kid Dracula has an interesting anti-piracy measure. From what I've been able to tell, no other Castlevania game has one of these. If a copyright test fails, starting at level 2, all non-player sprites will be removed, including their properties, making every level after 1 impossible to complete. You may know the troll that by inputting the Konami code at the title screen, you'll get a message saying, "Sorry, nothing this time." Turns out, there's code in the game for gaining 50 extra lives, which may have been the original intention for the code, but was removed for this much more iconic troll. In the Anniversary Collection's release, there is a particular unused asset. These enemies normally house a manji, not a swastika, as it's flipped. Now, know that to save space, devs often just flip the sprites when they're moving in the opposite direction. Put that information together and you have an obvious problem. Yeah, when the characters flip around, you get the no-no symbol. While this was probably a coincidence, this was thankfully removed in the Anniversary Collection, leaving the manji going unused. It really just doesn't help that these guys look like members of the KKK. Cultural differences aside, how did crosses get censored but not this? There are firstly 2 unused placeholder tiles. Yay. Yeah, there isn't too much to talk about for this game. It's really stifling my content. Anyway, on the topic of lost and found, some flying enemies were planned to have been able to cut the ropes you were climbing on. A real mechanic from hell. Otherwise, there were some plans for some rotating ropes, other tearing ropes, and ropes attached to birds. They really went all out on this rope thing. Ever find it weird that Dracula doesn't have 2 phases in this game? Well, technically not a second phase. After defeating Count Dracula, there was supposed to be this escape route phase. This would involve the tower collapsing, working like the spike chase phase in Castlevania The Adventure, only going the other way around. Despite the castle crumbling in basically every Castlevania game, it's a real surprise that they only really experimented with this idea in Castlevania 64. They show you how it would have looked in the Castlevania Anniversary Collection's ebook. Of course, I'm gonna show this to you in the best and most accurate way possible. I managed to get my hands on a prototype for Super Castlevania IV. This prototype lets us see all sorts of unused ideas. Of course, it's more simple, and also, many things are missing since they haven't coded it in yet. Many enemies have completely unused sprites. I'm not talking unfinished, I'm talking completely different art direction. It looks like the map's been completely changed in the original release. The map has a more 3D feel to it, sorta like you've taken a slice into the earth. Here's how the release one looks. It's a lot simpler, but I find that it lacks the awe effect that the old map had. The bosses seem to be on some form of crack. They actually seem balanced now. I actually lost some of them, which is something you never want to say to a Super Castlevania IV boss. Coronaut has so much health, his fight feels more random whether you beat him or not. He often pins you in places that the rocks he drops are unavoidable. Yes, there are some unused enemies here, like this homing bat. Meanwhile, we have this possessed wall meat being the only way to kill the Ouija table. Annoying enough. This bat is an absolute nightmare. He teleports, and you have to kill him, as if not, he'll continue following you. You just can't outrun him. While annoying, I get what the devs were thinking, since how do you make a difficult enemy when you have an 8-directional whip? Otherwise, some difficulties make no sense. How are you supposed to deal with this guy while you're on the stairs? Also, this place still has nothing. Why? Why is this here? Despite the upped difficulties, there's a lot more health scattered around the map. There are some exclusive songs to the prototype. While all songs seem to be a bit different, 2 in particular stand out. The Forest of Monsters stage has a completely original song. With regards to the overworld map, the song is completely different. You may recognize this song because it was later remixed into the Treasure Room theme in the main game. You have this ambiance kind of song too. It isn't used anywhere. Anyhow, it ends prematurely, forcing you back to the title screen after Block 5-2. Using cheat codes, we can bypass this, allowing us to see the unfinished stages. They're all fairly barren. Stage 6 is the last one to have completed visuals. Most of the bosses appear, but other than the ghosts in black, there aren't any enemies. While all the stage layouts are completed, after that, after Sir Gracul, there aren't even any candles anymore. It was really cool seeing the history behind these stages. Things we'd never know about without this prototype. Many objects have just random stuff attached to them. I don't know why I thought these hearts might have worked. These kill devices exist, and if you get hit by them and then land on stairs, you don't die. Until you leave the stairs, that is. The Zaf Bat soft locks you if you kill it, so you can't pass this stage without cheating. The Anniversary Collection tells us about this cylindrical tower. This goes unused. By hacking in the stage select and going to stage A1, guess what you find? That's right, our cylindrical tower. It has this effect, it seems, that makes the stage appear to be cylindrical. Only garbage exists, other than the beginning. It doesn't seem to have an endpoint. At least, I couldn't find one. It's only one of 2 stages that are like this here. The only stage I couldn't see to its completion was stage B2. The invisible grinder kills you no matter what invincibility cheats you have enabled. Dracula isn't coded into the game, which is unfortunate. From what I can tell, the only differing stage layout is the invisible section beneath the final staircase. An unused mechanic would involve Simon grabbing onto enemies and throwing them around. A simplified version of this would appear in Judgment. The game was supposed to have multiple routes, like in Castlevania III. Not to mention an interesting enemy appears in the demo ad. Yeah, that's something. It seems to be part of what Medusa would later become.
Remember, things are slippery when they're wet.
Kid Dracula has an unused song select in the Japanese version, which is cool, but look, it doesn't have anything else that I could find. This game has 2 secret artworks found in its files. These weren't released at the time, so it's a cool Easter egg. The game also holds a bunch of dev messages, which is pretty cool. On the topic of unused content, there isn't really any relevant information. Manabu Furuya says that the archer statues in Stage 3 were supposed to have their junk swaying in the wind. While most probably a joke, though I guess there has been worse found in some games, how could I help myself from making a little animation? One of the most famous examples of Castlevania hidden content is that if you put the PlayStation disc for Symphony of the Night in a CD player, you get a secret message.
As you can see, this is a PlayStation black disc.
What most people don't know is that it's a callback to when you can do the same thing with the disc of Rondo of Blood. You might remember the Exdash code from Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It'll work in the original version of Rondo too. By entering it, you get access to every stage from the start. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in any of the re-releases of the game, except maybe Virtual Console. I haven't tried that. There's a second, less known code you can input with a second controller. By inputting left to select and start on controller 2 and then pressing 1 on controller 1, you get sent to the level right before the boss fight. I couldn't figure out how to do it myself, so thanks to Agent Wyvern for showing the footage for me. Of course, not all stages have boss fights. By inputting the code on the prologue stage, you get this end of demo message, completely unviewable now in the new re-releases. I couldn't find any documentation on what would happen if you inputted this code on stage 5 Prime, another stage with no boss. Thanks to Agent Wyvern for coming to the rescue here. Turns out, it just sends you to the boss of stage 5. It's alternate stage. You'll never guess what's found behind the boss arena in stage 1. By forcing the camera forwards, you find this. We can actually find its whole sprite set in the code. Here's how it would look. Given where its limbs are located, I doubt it would move much. It has to be one of the most detailed enemies in the entire game. We also have this guy. Wonder what he's surprised about. I hope it's nothing bad. This weird fella appears too. I don't know what he could possibly have been for. We can also find early versions of Maria's subweapons. I can't tell you what he's supposed to be. He might be a chameleon or the turtle out of his shell since he gives the shell to Maria. I can't tell you for sure. The game has playable prototypes for Stage 3 and Stage 4. Not to mention the existence of Stage X, which is used for the Dracula X minigame. The text on the bottom says, "God, grant me strength." The subtitle for Stage 2, so it may be a prototype for that stage instead. Where do we start with you? Many of Castlevania Bloodlines prototypes have leaked over the years. They of course showcase a lot of unused concepts. For example, we have these songbooks that you can collect that would change the music to play one of 3 classic themes. Also, item crashes were supposed to be specific item drops, not something activated by a specific button input. Getting 2 of these would let you activate that weird orb thing. And yes, it means you're stuck with them, you can't use the lower versions anymore. Anyhow, many enemy sprites have been completely changed. One of the most notable differences is the Stage 1 boss, and the Medusa heads look absolutely horrifying. Still, for such an early prototype, the game has a lot of detail. Also, you know how Eric has a weirdly violent death animation? John was supposed to have one like that too, where he decayed away into a pile of bones. I feel like Eric's was more graphic, so I don't know why John's was removed. Like the previous prototype we've covered, this one ends early. Also, like the previous one, with a code, we can see a little bit farther into the game. They are very unfinished, being made up of mostly garbage. Otherwise, did you know that Eric's pole vault was supposed to send you forwards? Speaking of Eric, he was much more powerful here. You used to be able to just point your spear in any direction and just demolish anything that comes close. A second leaked prototype has this stage select, allowing us to see this massive unused room. Inside this massive room, if you go all the way up the stairs, you will see this huge dirigible in the background. This thing isn't seen anywhere in the main game for Bloodlines. Continuing, this prototype is still fairly broken. This isn't the only unused room with unused assets. This room is filled with pooling lava. It has these black platforms that melt upon contact with the lava. A mechanic like this was never used in the main game. Also, you hitting enemies damages them just like how they damage you. Apparently, you can damage enemies with your invincibility frames too, but I haven't checked that. This kind of mechanic has existed in previous games, just to a much lesser extent. Anyhow, Bloodlines was planned to have 4 characters, just like in Dracula's Curse. First, we have Yoko Fernandez. She'd throw shurikens, and could even climb and jump off walls. Of course, the character with the Grant archetype was removed. She'd later appear in the Sorrow titles, but as a magic user. It took getting rid of any relation to Grant to make her appear in a game. She's accompanied by this Thor-like character, Bolt Erickson. His hammer has this weird attribute, breaking unique blocks which no other character could break. If you've played Infernax, Alcida is the exact same way. In fact, some of the similarities are uncanny, which is cool since his concept never gets reused. Sometime recently, an internal world-building fax for Castlevania Bloodlines was released to the public. This gives us access to all sorts of unused information. It mentions that Elizabeth Bartley started the Great War. Forget what you know, World War I started by a Castlevania character. She killed an Austrian prince from a family that had imprisoned her 300 years earlier. Weirdly enough, it refers to Simon Belmont's battle as the present, whereas Bloodlines is the future, and Dracula's Curse is the past. It even plans a sequel to Bloodlines, though while this wouldn't really happen, Bloodlines would get a sequel in the name of Portrait of Ruin in 2006. And don't worry, Christopher hasn't been forgotten, though he would be for the next 10 years or so. Anyway, it tries to tie in Bram Stoker's novel in multiple ways. This game, for those who don't know, is the first one to make mention of the Vampire Killer Whip. This fax makes mention that the Vampire Killer Whip is not the one that Simon and the other Belmonts used. It makes mention of 3 separate mystical whips. First, we have Excalibur, which is owned by the Belmont family. Then we have the Vampire Killer, which the Morrises own. Then we finally have Death Mercury, which mysteriously disappeared. It makes mention that Excalibur attacks with a fireball when the user concentrates, a reference to Christopher's attack. Anyway, for a long time there was a theory that the Alucard spear was actually just a mistranslation of Lucard, the spear having nothing to do with Alucard. This fax disproves that. It specifically mentions that the spear has the same name as Alucard, the Alucard that fought alongside Ralph C. Belmont in Dracula's Curse. Ralph being Trevor's Japanese name. While it does say it's unknown whether there's any correlation between the spear and the vampire, you know there is. The audacity the team had to say that John Morris likes to swim is just incredible. He also dislikes cried by women. I don't know if John just gets disgusted by women when they cry, but John, dude. Eric was forced into an arranged marriage at 11 years old to Lucy Seward, who was who knows how young, until she ended up dying calmly after being bit by Elizabeth, followed by Eric cutting off her head and impaling her with a stake. Goddamn. It makes mention of a Michael R. Belmont, the same Michael who would train Reinhard Schneider in Castlevania 64, apparently. There's also a whole Belmont family tree. Something really weird is that it states that Christopher and Simon are part of separate lineages. This would explain why Christopher has the Fireball Whip, since he holds Excalibur, whereas Simon, who would get passed down a different whip, probably Death Mercury, doesn't have that ability. He has a different whip. Simon being, as far as we can tell, homeless in Simon's Quest can explain why it would disappear. The Belmonts previously being exiled could also explain why Death Mercury's records were lost. The family tree actually makes mention of Erickson, even Bolt. Nice to know that the Anniversary Collection isn't talking completely out of their ass. The title screen has a completely different track. It was later repurposed for the Invincibility theme. We also have the 9th song in the sound test. Unlike the previous unused pieces of music, which were hugely disappointing losses, this one's just okay. Dracula X is like super hard DLC for Rondo, but received worldwide releases, leading to a lot of confusion from people thinking that it was just a port from the same game. Given that many of Konami's games were negatively impacted by the 1995 Kobe earthquake, it's possible that Dracula X had this problem as well and lost a lot of content, though this is just speculation. Since I have nothing else, I might as well mention that some walls have these weird ejector property to them. The weird part though is that this doesn't occur with every wall. Sometimes you'll just fall to your death. The same thing can happen with some ceilings, though not all of them. Sometimes you just get soft-locked. The game does have a secret stage select. There is something really weird about its port in the Castlevania Advance collection. It holds one of the only pieces of censorship in the entire collection, something that I didn't think companies still did in this day and age. However, unfortunately, the Wolfman boss loses his penis.
No, it cannot be!
Symphony of the Night has a whole bunch of unused voice clips.
So you are the one called Shaft?
Most are uninteresting, but there is one set that proves the existence of an unused ending. Prepare for a cinematic masterpiece.
Welcome to my castle.
Wait! Don't hurt Victor anymore!
Maria?
Victor!
You saved me. If not for you, I would have lost to this fool.
For demons, I hold you to your oath. Defend your master who commands you. Such power in such a little girl. It won't end like this. You should be destroyed along with this castle.
It's over, but the sacrifice was great. Maria, Richter, I did not wish for you to die. Such is the fate of mortals. I'm certain that some dark force was behind Maria's transformation, but it doesn't matter now.
Koji Igarashi, who was the co-director of the Inverse Castle for Symphony of the Night, mentions that to get this ending, you'd have to kill Richter despite seeing that Shaft's ball is manipulating him. Yoshinori Suzuki, the game designer for the Sega Saturn port, elaborates on the topic greatly. He mentions that there exists another full set of Maria graphics separate from the one we see in-game. This one could have been called Black Maria, and would have had her own moveset. This is clearly referring to the evil Maria we see in the unused ending. Underneath the first room of the game, there are a bunch of unused rooms you can glitch in to enter, including a fully functional save point. The room still has a bunch of glitched tiles, but don't worry about them. I guess they scrapped the area before they refined the room textures. The cool part is that upon exit, the door will open and stay open, allowing you to exit and enter the area freely. The door will close after you beat Slow-Growing Gaibon, hinting on how the door was supposed to be activated. Though, if you open it after you fight them, you won't have any problems. Like all glitched rooms, it counts for your map percentage. If you're curious, yes, these rooms also appear in the inverted castle. Getting into the room is much more difficult since you have to glitch through a bunch of walls and perform some exploits. You still can enter both rooms without cheating. After getting above the ceiling, you just have to perform a wing smash and then exit bat form as fast as possible. Unlike the normal version, this one has a door before the save point. It's the only one of these doors that appears without a CD room following it. Also, I hope you brought a library card, because unlike the upside up version, the door doesn't open here. There's no other way out.
No problem.
While this area is fully fleshed out in the Sega Saturn port, given that there are very few people working on both versions of the game, it's unclear what this area would have really been for. Now, you may have heard me mention glitch rooms. There is a whole bunch of them. I've seen people with map percentages of over 450%. When the maximum percentage normally is 200.6. I'm not really including these since they're not rooms per se, they're not even scrapped ideas, they're just glitches, and hold mostly just garbage textures, if you can see them at all. There's a bunch of hidden test areas in the game. This one's pretty cool, it has one of the Japanese dev interviews playing in the background. There's another similar test area, but it's just the first room of the Marble Gallery repeated 13 times. Richter has a bunch of unused palettes. They're always loaded. You can have him equip these while playing as him or while fighting him. He has this jump animation too. This is used as his double jump in Portrait of Ruin. Ignoring the first frame, Richter has this spin kick found in the code. This was also used in Portrait of Ruin. These frames are also found in the code. The first two get used in Portrait of Ruin, as part of the secret combo move. It may have worked like Maria's sweep kick in the Sega Saturn port. This frame gets used in part in Harmony of Despair, being reworked into the dive kick sprite. Richter's uppercut only has one frame of animation in the game. making the rest of the sprites unused. The first 4 get reused in Portrait of Ruin, in tandem with the uppercut. The last 3 get used when Richter's called away by Maria, while this frame never gets used. There's an item crash animation that goes completely unused too, though you might recognize it from something. A single frame of Richter's stair climb animation persists, for some reason. Richter also has a bunch of damage animations, for when he takes damage. While unused in the original PS1 version, they do get used in the Xbox Live Arcade version of the game, minus the last one. By sheer coincidence, you can actually see this sprite in-game if you glitched Richter into the Dracula boss fight. There are a few unused sub-weapons, like this Bible Fist. It's possible that this would work like the Sacred Fist in Harmony of Dissonance, given how much Harmony of Dissonance takes from Symphony of the Night. There's also this question mark book. It also doesn't seem to know what it did. Maybe it would function with randomness somehow, kind of like the meal ticket? Guess what's found next to the heart max up and life max up sprites? That's right, the magic max up. I always thought it was weird that mana was the only status on display which you couldn't increase. Guess the dev team thought so too, but had to remove it sometime down the development process. We also have a bunch of sprites for this. Put it together and you get this cursed object. Man, why couldn't have they just kept going with cute beetles? Anyhow, the words on top say, boss. I guess it was a boss placeholder object somehow. There is this one, perfectly working, flashing treasure chest with a gold value of 5,000, more than double any other money item in the game. They just decided to go out of their way, get rid of the item, and made getting the duplicator way more annoying than it had to be, just cause it's funny. There's also this turkey that could appear in a candle, and doesn't do anything. We've also got the no. They really wanted to make sure this wasn't used. It protects your character from holy attacks. The page mentions it can be equipped in Alucard's right hand specifically. I don't know if it can't be used in his left hand. I feel like it might have been planned for a boss like Richter to be immune to holy, having them hold it before they found better code. I can't be sure. We also have the autograph, which would be repurposed for the signed pencil board in the Sega Saturn port. We also have this ultra healing armor. Basically, if you made contact with an enemy, you'd heal instead of taking damage. Normal attacks would still hit you, however. Now make could be also used as, I'm pretty sure it means sword, and as an armor. It literally gives you the guard ability, meaning it blocks all attacks. You're invincible. By forcing the Fairy Scroll relic onto Richter and fighting Dracula, Phase 2 has the name of Greater Demon. This is thought to be a leftover name for the Lesser Demon in the Upside Down Library, which is stronger than the other versions of the Lesser Demon, seen on screen. There are a couple of other unused sprites in the game, but they're not really notable, so I won't go into them in detail. Back to Controller 2 shenanigans, you can still trigger this leftover dev code. By hitting the triangle button on Controller 2 anywhere in the underground caverns, the bridge will break without needing to use the skeleton ape. There is an unused artwork. It's of the succubus, with her entire chest revealed. I don't think I'm allowed showing that. Toru Hagihara, Symphony of the Night's director, mentions that originally, the second opening in the clock room was supposed to open once an hour, not by using the stopwatch. So, initially, there were supposed to be some better items inside. It was too long, they changed it to using the stopwatch instead, meaning they needed to replace the old items with worse ones. This resulted in the crappy Alucard weapons. After all, there was a moving platform that would appear if you knew the right time to wait. You didn't even need a double jump. You can get there at the beginning of the game. When they changed it to needing the double jump, they just never replaced the items. An idea that flew around was for the game to have the same setting as Castlevania Bloodlines. Alucard defeated Count Dracula, not Quincy Morris. Anyhow, this interviewer asked just the perfect question, thank you so much. Anyway, Elizabeth Bathory and Gilda Ray were supposed to make an appearance. As we should know, Bathory appears in Bloodlines, but Gilda Ray only will appear in the Castlevania 64 games. No one knows what happens to the characters after the game ends, but Toshihiro Furukawa does mention that Maria isn't with Alucard 10,000 years later. Say I'm looking too much into things, but Kid Dracula is 10,009 years old. He's referencing that they are in fact the same character. If you're paying attention, you may hear the song The Tragic Prince, the Clock Tower theme, playing in the background of this video. Did you know that this song was off tune? Most people thought that this was done intentionally, but the lead guitarist Takayuki Fuji confirmed that this was actually a mistake due to laziness, and that the song was supposed to be a bit different. The Game.com, for those who don't know, was the first video game system to have a touchscreen. I'm mentioning this because Symphony of the Night has a cancelled port on this system. It's playable start to finish, inverted castle and all, but I couldn't get an emulator to work, so you're just stuck with images. There's a whole bunch of unused music. Of course, we have to start with the track that plays when you put the game disc into a CD player.
As you can see, this is a PlayStation Black Disc. Cut number 1 contains computer data, so please don't play it. But you probably won't listen to me anyway, will you?
We also have the song the Fairy Familiar was supposed to play. We also have silence. Believe it or not, it's not silent. We also have this lullaby theme. I feel it's what the ending theme was supposed to be before they changed it to whatever the hell I Am the Wind is. This seems to be a stage wind jingle like in the previous Castlevania games after you beat a boss. Unfortunately, the actual instrumentation has been lost, so we can only guess what it would really sound like. Now we have to talk about Castlevania, the Bloodletting. People erroneously claim that this was a fan name, but it was officially revealed in an old brochure and was actually trademarked in 1995. Koji Igarashi was questioned about whether this game was the cancelled 32X title he worked on before working on Symphony. However, the game he worked on hadn't been given a name before it was cancelled, meaning that the Bloodletting was a completely separate cancelled game for the 32X. On that topic, he mentions the existence of a rival character which had been scrapped. It's unclear what game he actually comes from, as it's possible he could be from Rondo of Blood or the 32X game which was cancelled. Unfortunately, the rival is right between Richter and Maria's Rondo and 32X sprites, so we can't really be sure. One of the biggest problems with Castlevania Legends is that it looked worse than Belmont's Revenge despite that game releasing 6 years earlier. Oddly enough, images of some of its prototypes show it having more detail than what was actually shown in-game, from having visible trees instead of vague pine trees in the distance, to the zombies actually having clothing instead of being vague, decrepit bodies. In the unused sound test, we can access the unused song. It also has this unused Game Over theme. That was tough to listen to. Since it just copies the Adventure's engine, some assets make a reappearance. Due to time constraints and inexperience on 3D hardware, Castlevania for the N64 had loads of great ideas and content which were scrapped to get the game released at all. Remember the dirigible from the Castlevania Bloodlines prototype? It actually appears in 64. Someone from the Bloodlines dev team probably worked on 64 as well, which explains the similarities. Take this unused piece of text from 64. One adventure is over, but the truth remains in darkness. Clear normal to discover the truth. This is an idea from Bloodlines. The unused text suggests that you used to be able to beat the game on the easiest setting. You just wouldn't be able to see the whole ending. This message can actually appear if you beat the game on easy. However, in the game on easy, the game ends early during the castle center section. It looks like the game was planned to handle different difficulty levels the same way as Bloodlines. In the Villa stage, if you go out of bounds, you can find Malice posing behind a wall. On the cutting room floor page, there's a bunch of stuff that was found but not added to the page yet. I didn't want to leave them out, so I decided to do some digging. I reached out to Moises, who replied and gave me some insight on the Castlevania 64 speedrun Discord, which had even more information about the unused content for the game. More on that later. We have this Reddit user who is a 100% accurate secondary source. They give me a summary about what Castlevania 64 was supposed to be. Guess we're going through this crazy rabbit hole. The Reddit user explains how the game was meant to take place in the 1900s, explaining the anachronisms everywhere. This also explains why Michael R. Belmont is Reinhardt's father, despite him being alive during World War I. Some early previews stated that Reinhardt was supposed to be a descendant of Dracula himself. Cornell, who was planned for 64, initially had a much darker storyline. His sister Ada was meant to be executed for being a werewolf, instead of just being kidnapped. This is supposed to mirror Dracula's loss of his wife. Kohler, the lost fourth character, is mostly shrouded in mystery. The Redditor mentions how there was meant to be a Kohler too, a female counterpart to Kohler, who was supposed to be his rival. Every character was planned to have a rival and an ally. Early in the game's development, it was meant to be more open world, being modeled after Simon's Quest. This explains the day and night cycle, as well as the unused character stats and similar items. There seems to be some remnants on the topic of stronger enemies appearing at night. As for those who don't know, item drops are more common at night than in the daytime. Same thing with the moon phases. Enemies were supposed to get stronger during a full moon. Vampires were supposed to be much more complicated. Taking once again from Simon's Quest in that you can't trust the villagers, vampires were supposed to be able to pretend to be common characters, who would suspiciously avoid the sunlight of the daytime. On the topic of nighttime, your vision was supposed to be partially obscured at night, on top of puzzles being time dependent. There were supposed to be other adventurers set on destroying Dracula, like Charlie Vincent, but they would fail and die as the game went on, allowing you to take their stuff. There is a rumor that the corpses found in early game levels were remnants of these lost adventurers. The vampire status in the game was supposed to be unbelievably awesome. You'd gain all sorts of vampiric abilities, at the cost of not being able to cross sunlit areas. A relationship building mechanic was planned too. Your goal was to play the characters best according to their personalities in order to get the best endings. A speculated example of this would have been saving Rosa from suicide. You may have been given the option to just let Rosa kill herself, negatively affecting future gameplay. After all, we have Rosa scenes of her saving Reinhardt, and ones of her trying to kill Reinhardt under Dracula's orders. Renan is one of the most interesting merchants in the series. Basically, if you used him too much, you'd activate his secret boss fight and he'll try to kill you. Renan's contract has an unused description. If you decide to purchase, 1 point is used. Instead of giving him gold, you give him your points. The user surmised that 1 point was supposed to be 1 part of your soul, which explains a lot more of Renan's contract, which doesn't make much sense if you think about it. As previously mentioned, if you take too much from Renan's shop, he'll try to take your soul. After all, there's nothing really stopping him from attacking you even if you don't break that 30k gold limit. But if he's already taking your soul as currency, then he needs to be ended in order for you to get your soul back. Not to mention how Renan may become stronger than the player if enough of their soul has been acquired. Anyway, Renan's contract was supposed to be a carryable item, something that was soon to be removed. Each character was meant to be playable from the start, each one marking their own difficulty levels. Reinhardt was normal, Cornell was hard, and Kohler was easy. Which difficulty Carrie was is unknown, but is probably easiest, given that she has homing projectiles. Anyway, each character was supposed to have their own ability, and was capable of using a process bar. In the game code, there are remnants of this process bar. Think like a mana meter that would build over time. Pre-release footage shows that there's going to be 4 bars that do different things, on top of characters being able to use some abilities freely. Reinhardt was supposed to be able to swing across gaps like in Super Castlevania IV. In fact, leftovers of these hooks can be found in the Tower of Execution. Another lost Super Castlevania IV ability was for Reinhardt to be able to brandish his whip, like Simon. To follow, Reinhardt's rival was the Grim Reaper, whereas his ally was supposed to be Rosa. There's speculation around what Carrie's abilities were supposed to be. In the Dracula 3D ad, we can see Carrie summoning some bricks. Maybe she had some telekinetic abilities? Her rival was Actrice, while her supporting character was supposed to be her cousin, which at some point was supposed to be the undead Sypha Belnades. Cornell, who was supposed to be a martial artist, was able to transform into a werewolf. His rival and supporting character is unknown, as no evidence of his Legacy of Darkness rival, Ortega, exists whatsoever. Anyway, the parts of Kohler that had been finished were repurposed into 2 characters. The Frankenstein gardener who chases the player around the villa's hedge maze, and Henry Oldry in Legacy of Darkness. Kohler's abilities are unknown. One early preview states that it's possible to turn one character from strong to fast. We're also told that since he was undead, Kohler couldn't be turned into a vampire. On his rivals and allies, we have this unused illustration. After reverse image searching, guess what page it can be found on? That's right, this is Kohler 2. Anyway, enough talk, let's get back to the cutting room floor. Alright, I read through the 300 times the Discord said unused. An old preview includes a wooden stake as a sub-weapon. These can be found in the game's code too. Another sub-weapon from the code is a rose. These get used by Rosa in-game. The game also includes a garlic texture. Given the influence Simon's Quest had on this game, it probably would have worked the same way. There's some unused descriptions about every sub-weapon. It mentions that the knife was a close frontal attack. It also says it could stab twice rapidly. It mentions that holy water is safe to humans. Were the other sub-weapons not supposed to be? It might be referring to the possible fights with characters that was removed from the game, if you were to treat them badly. We have some more unused items. Remember that process bar from earlier? We have the incandescent gaze. This would highlight a player's focus for a fixed period. This focus may have been referring to the bar which would be consumed upon use. We also have the pot pourri. This would have cured petrification, a status that appears in many other Castlevania games. Similarly, there's an unused status effect, STO, something that's probably short for stone. Finally, we have the engagement ring, with the description of a present from the Dark Lord. It would increase status by 10%. Note that there's no statuses in this game. In Carrie's bad ending, Malice, who's Dracula in disguise, would actually propose to her. This probably would tie into one another. There's an unused location in the game, the test grid, which is a debug room, that actually makes an appearance in some previews. The stage from the ending cutscene is fully playable. More on the ending cutscene stage. There's an entire lower section with a floor and full collisions. There's an unused Cerberus enemy. These are actually different from the ones seen in-game. That's not the only unused enemy. We also have this fully operational one. It has the body of the King Skeleton, but works like the normal skeleton soldiers. Its body seems to be partly in the ground. There are some pretty grim animations in the game code. We have these two of Carrie being skewered in both directions. Reinhardt has some of these too. I guess it was deemed too violent. Less grim, Reinhardt has this unused shimmying animation. Carrie has one for swimming. Think Mario 64. If you're not convinced, it's right next to the drowning animation. It would have been nice to be able to swim instead of just drowning. If you remember Castlevania III, Dracula's Curse from a while back, you'll remember its theme for old movies. The real effect it has for its intro also appears, completely unused, in Castlevania 64. It also has this unused heat haze effect, which is pretty cool. It seems to have this alternate rendition of the Demon Salesman intro. Some random YouTube comment claims that it could possibly be Kohler's rival theme, due to the similarities between this and the themes from the other rivals. I don't have a better idea. Malice has two weapons always loaded, a bow and a sword, though they're never used. There is a scene where Malice shoots an arrow at the character. If you force the camera onto Malice during this scene, you'll see he does actually play an animation, but the bow is nowhere to be seen. As for the sword, I don't know. There was an idea to hide the save points in obscure locations like in Candles, which executive said, yeah, let's hide the save points. I can't really be sure anything I'm about to mention is actually Legacy of Darkness exclusive. I'm just mentioning things on the cutting room floor page. Don't kill the messenger. There are some leftover debug codes in the game. By inputting the one on screen, you get access to all skins and all characters from the get-go. There are a whole bunch of these codes. Thanks to Jupiter Climb's video for listing them all. Like in Rondo and Symphony of the Night, you have a new thing you can do by using a secondary controller and inputting something. In this scenario, you have to be holding R on a controller attached to the third controller port. Look at the skeleton. Notice how he's throwing bones with his left hand. Now let's look what happens when we hold R. Now he's throwing his bones with his right hand, and he's completely missing our character. He throws his bones much farther than normal. This happens no matter where you are compared to him. I'm not sure whether they were testing different skeleton mechanics or something, but this is very weird. The execution key from 64, which is completely useless, goes unused this time. There are also 3 special gems. I don't know what they do. Castlevania Resurrection was a cancelled title for the Sega Dreamcast. You could play as 2 time-displaced characters, Sonia Belmont from Castlevania Legends, and Victor Belmont, a Belmont who didn't want to be a vampire hunter. From the leaked prototype, we can see that Sonia was supposed to fight with a whip and an axe, automatically using the axe at close range, think Metal Slug. You'd have access to this process bar, which you could charge to use stronger attacks or even item crashes. The prototype we have access to is fairly outdated. It's unclear how far the game actually got in production. We have access to multiple areas in what seems to be the first level. Unlike popular belief, each area is fully connected to one another. You don't need to use the main menu to progress. The game's complete soundtrack can be found online, but the game only plays the first theme, Have Mercy. Opening the exit door usually involved killing the right enemy, though being a prototype it doesn't always work properly. The snake chase phase doesn't work on real hardware. The phase itself is atrocious, understandably. You can't see where you're going, and there's a bunch of hands in the ground that try to grab you. Not to mention the random pits. Interestingly, your jumps do have momentum. This could actually change your jump height, which is pretty cool. At the end of the corridor, the Hydra will die. The doors will open, but there's an invisible barrier blocking your path. You can glitch through it, however, and progress like normal. The game would have marked the first time the Bible and the boomerang would have appeared in 3D. After killing the right enemies, the doors in the center will open, revealing a boss fight. It's Medusa, and it has 2 phases. After you kill phase 1, you have to fight Medusa's head. After you finish that off, you collect the orb and you get taken back to the title screen. Speaking of which, I couldn't help but notice that the title screen uses the same font as the previous cancelled game, the Bloodletting. The plot of the game is to stop Dracula from taking over the world with his newest wife. Yeah, there is a female Dracula, as they call it. The game was cancelled the day the PlayStation 2 was released. I guess they really didn't believe in the Dreamcast. Of course, we have to talk about this guy. Hugh Baldwin, your ally turned bad, is said to be playable in multiple articles for the demo at the Tokyo Game Show 2000. The accuracy of these claims are highly questionable. According to some legend who wrote a 2024 article on this topic, there wasn't any indication whatsoever of the game's marketing indicating that Hugh was supposed to be playable. Not from demo images, promotional content, or otherwise. I couldn't find any unused animations for Hugh which would hint at him being playable, other than him having way more sprites than other bosses, alongside a very high attack amount, and being more elaborate overall. Unfortunately, without access to the demo, we can't know for sure. More concrete, like Symphony of the Night, there's a stage wing jingle. This is clearly a reference to the stage wind jingle in Super Castlevania IV. This remake of the 1993 X68000 Sharp game is sort of an enhanced port for the PS1. We've got the unused demo assets as usual. The previous unused images return. The copyright data and a bunch of other writing is missing for some reason. If you take a look at this, you'll see that Simon has a new knockback animation, even in original mode. Naturally, Simon, who by this point onwards is going to get progressively more slutty designs, uses the new design for his dominatrix skin. The old design, now shown on screen, still exists in the code. Weirdly though, the arranged design also has the old knockback animation in the code too. Why did they change the knockback animation in the first place? This had to have been changed pretty late in development, since why would they pay someone for a design they wouldn't use? On top of it all, the doppelganger still uses the old animation. Apparently, arranged mode actually has a fully functional sound test. Unfortunately, as of now, Mednafin doesn't support cheat codes that OpenEMU can access, so you'll have to take my word on it. On the sound module screen, we have another second controller input. By inputting L1 plus O plus X on controller 2, you can make this screen appear. Emulation of this sound module hadn't been finished at the time the port was going to come out, so they just didn't add support for the GM sound module. And by performing the input, you get this hidden message. At some point in stage 1, you have this random platform. It's impossible to make it up here by normal means. You just can't be hit far enough. By cheating, if you do make it up here, there's actually a money bag that appears. Given that the platform placement doesn't even make any sense, I feel like they just forgot to remove it. Overseas releases of this game doesn't let you break breakable walls with your sub-weapons. This is due to a porting issue. You're able to do this in the Japanese release. The debug menu for this game allows us to access all sorts of weird stuff. In the enemy list, there is an enemy that doesn't appear in the game. Slap starts as a slime. Then he becomes a bunch of slimes. He takes the shape of a humanoid. He'll also follow the player in the goal of slapping him, or I don't know. He can't hit Juste, nor can Juste hit him, and he has no collisions. In Harmony of Dissonance, we have this boss fight that gets interrupted by Talos. We never get a chance to actually interact with the guy on screen. By using the right sub-weapon spellbook combo, we can see that this enemy actually has a name. The Revenge Armor. By trying to exit the debug room, you can see that this is actually just the boss rush chamber. Some weird stuff happens in the Castlevania double pack. 3 items get removed: the Medusa pendant, the mirror pendant, and the gold headband. The first 2 make sense. They're completely obsoleted by the Heart of Vlad and the Rib of Vlad, doing the exact same thing. This still doesn't explain the missing gold headband. Technically, it is obsoleted by the Platinum Crown, which you can only access by buying it for 9,999 gold. Anyhow, the Platinum Crown has 2 higher defense than the gold headband, making the gold headband the second best head item in the game. If they were trying to save space, why wouldn't they get rid of something more useless, like this? I guess they were trying to make the crown more worthwhile. What's the point of paying so much money for such a small increase in defense? It also doesn't explain why no magic mode was left out from Harmony of Dissonance. No soul mode is still an Aria of Sorrow regardless. I guess they may have just not cared about this for Harmony of Dissonance because, let's be honest, it's the least renowned GBA Castlevania, but it's still an odd removal. There are a set of fully loaded ghost rooms off the map. To enter them, you have to perform a bat zip right in this specific location. Thanks to 404Error for showing how to do this. There's a bunch of sequences of rooms, some more loaded than others. The rooms themselves are flat corridors, and despite the similarities, it's not the boss rush stage. If you decide to suspend your game, the game will say you're in Mina Hakuba, who, for those who don't know, is the main love interest of the game. According to a YouTube comment from 10 years ago, this is left over from a time when you could use Mina as a save. Also, anyone curious to see what's found behind the bridge? There is nothing. Despite not being accessible, the French and German versions of the game are found in the North American ROM. It's weird they wouldn't let you access them despite them being complete. Even the differing names for the status effects appear too. For some reason, the Cognazo Soul has 2 separate descriptions in French. That reason being that the Cognazo Soul has 2 separate entries, one being unused. The descriptions for the English and German versions are the same, despite there being 2 entries. While the German one isn't much better, I hear the French translation is notoriously bad, so it makes sense. There are many unused graphics, which could do who knows what. Some interesting ones include a paraglider, a toy Soma with an attack animation, a syringe, Japan, even the old Konami mascots. Skull Key was planned to make a reappearance. Thank God it didn't, cause no one likes Skull Key. There's a bunch of others too. You might recognize some of them, like the Fairy Hammer from Symphony of the Night. You might also notice this absolutely humongous potion. You'll never guess what's hidden within the bell icon sprites. Well, inside, there's a singular frame of Alucard. Yeah, I don't know what he's doing here either. He doesn't even appear in this game. Not with this design, at least. Here's him with the palette that would match him the most. For those who don't know, the final boss of this game is Chaos. After you beat him, you get sent back to your last save, meaning you can't really kill him and get his enemy entry. Despite it being inaccessible, he does actually have an entry. The description states that he's the root of all chaotic things. The unused description actually gets referenced in the Advanced Collections Encyclopedia. Like Harmony of Dissonance, Aria of Sorrow has a debug menu. One setting lets you choose an enemy to fight against. It takes you to a room. Or should I say, a ghost room. That's right, the ghost room was actually for debugging. It is in fact the exact same place. I don't know why it's loaded, but it's really cool. It's kind of like enemy set mode from Dawn, just more limited. On a more horrifying note, Chaos follows you. I guess he's programmed to always be on the center of the screen. Anyway, there are a bunch of options that put you in just the most horrifying situations. One mode lets you play as the toy Soma. He doesn't have the attack animation, however. It makes me think he was supposed to work like Bear Tank did in Circle of the Moon. We also have control over this bat. I don't think you're supposed to move him like I did. You know Blore? This guy? Initially, it was planned for you to be able to get his laser beam as an attack. The dev team decided that there were just too many laser beams at the time, so they changed it to a Blore punch instead. The reason why Soma Cruz is named Soma Cruz is incredibly random. Turns out, he's named after this Penelope Cruz who had visited Japan at the time. Soma being taken from the ritualistic drink makes more sense. After all, Soma's whole storyline is about purging the evil inside him. Despite Curse of Darkness having one, Lament of Innocence doesn't have a page on the cutting room floor. The only thing I found was that the rosary is programmed as an inventory item in the code. You can also access some locations normally only found in cutscenes, like the forest, Ronaldo's backyard, and the broken castle entrance. Yeah, information was lacking, but all hope was not lost. See, about 10 months ago, I had done this Curse of Darkness challenge, where I tried to beat the game without jumping. In that video, I had reached out to CastJ1357, who was a great help for the challenge. Since I had no better ideas, I thought maybe he could help again. CastJ gives me a few pieces of information, which is pretty cool. I'm then directed to this Shuin individual, who can help me find the information I need. I'm first told about a bunch of unused strings. One is a counterattack that can be used directly after being hit by an enemy, and the other one seems to be a simple counter. Counters can be seen in the Lords of Shadow series, which makes sense, since Lords of Shadow 1 is based off of Lament of Innocence. There are these 4 strings of what seems to be some form of attack. Shuin adds that these could be descriptions for items, skills, or relics. 360 mentions that it enables the whip to search out enemies. My mind was going places like the whip was talking to you or something. But no, it makes more sense that it's just tracking enemies with an attack. I still think my idea is better. We also have a combo technique that lets you attack barehanded with magic. It might have allowed for Leon to attack like his doppelganger does in his rematch. Come to think of it, it's really weird that you can't. 361 says that it enables the whip to produce a shockwave. It seems to resemble another attack, though they are different text entities. There are 4 unused relic names, which may be associated with the 4 attacks we spoke about. Many areas of the game have an alternate name. They seem to be named as if they're part of one giant map, instead of a sequence of what seems to be completely unrelated areas. Finishing the topic of unused strings, there's one talking about species wiped out. It looks like the game was planned to keep track of how many enemies you killed. There are 452 enemy entities, when the game only uses about 85. The snakes Medusa sends out have their own entries. This makes sense as you are able to kill them. This entry has a description of thorns. It may be a version of the thornweed or un enemy. Occam's swords have an entry too. This is a little weirder than Medusa's servants, since as far as I'm aware you can't kill them. There are these weird shadow tests too, which could be anything. The words on each entry say, under construction. Well, I think I went over the best stuff. There is a little more, but this video was never meant to be all-encompassing. Julius, Yoko, and Alucard, the secret playable characters, have a bunch of attacks. Soma isn't supposed to be able to use these. Of course, where there's a will, there's a way. Soma is able to access a wide array of these characters' attacks, without using cheats, that is. To access them, you need to use the Succubus glitch. Activatable by using the Succubus soul and then using an attack that teleports you forwards. If done right, you'll start flying out of bounds, and all sorts of stuff will happen. After resuspending, you'll have a chance to respawn on the map, possibly gaining a bunch of items, though often you'll just get soft locked out of bounds. Most of the enemy attacks are actually coded in as normal weapons in Souls, though their names and descriptions are fairly primitive. The Japanese version has a lot more detail. The descriptions for Julius's subweapons simply have J in their text box. Their names are of course Cross, Holy Water, and Grand Cross. And no, the axe is not obtainable. I guess it's hard-coded into Julius's character. Yoko's spells are called Holy Flame, Blue Splash, and Holy Lightning, each one saying Yoko's magic. The description for Alucard's bat transformation is Alucard's ability. Julius's vampire killer is called Holy Whip, despite not having the holy attribute. Also, Soma is unable to brandish his whip like Julius can. The Alucard sword has the description of Alucard's favorite sword. Soma is unable to angle the sword downwards. Meanwhile, Soma can't access Yoko's staff at all. The bare knuckles are weirdly finicky. They're an item for when you unequip your weapon. The glitched bare knuckle weapons actually over-prioritize the knife in the intro cutscene. Here's me starting the intro with the bare knuckles in my inventory. Without even going into my menu, I'm punching things. Now here I'm starting with every other item in the game. I'm starting like normal with the knife. Off that tangent, there's actually a Castle Map 0 in the game, as well as unused maps for every area in the game. We normally only have maps for the first 3 areas of the game. If you force Alucard to equip a knuckle weapon and use a special attack, he'll actually use his old Symphony of the Night animation. There is no way for him to do this in-game. If you try to do a down angle attack with the Vampire Killer, this animation will play. Julius doesn't actually have a sprite like this. As for those who don't know, the whip doesn't have real physics. All possible inputs are pre-generated. That's true for every Castlevania game except Super Castlevania IV. This is thought to be a leftover of an unused Julius attack. Maybe he was supposed to have a multi-directional attack like in Harmony of Despair, or maybe it is just a part of a whip retraction animation, kind of like what he gets in Aria of Sorrow. Back to the succubus glitch, you're sometimes able to get even higher soul counts than you're normally able to, allowing for certain souls to get even stronger. Getting more of the skeleton soul will allow you to throw a small skull. This idea was probably just scrapped. Powering up the Ripper Soul will just make the knife worse, as it will no longer pierce through enemies. If you make it even stronger, the game will crash. The disc armor's disc will become invisible. It might have had a new design that was removed. The Bat Soul will actually get a 4th, fully functioning bat, when he normally can only have a maximum of 3. The Spin Devil Soul can get stronger endlessly. The tornado it makes will get slightly larger every level. Same with the Viewer Soul. You'll get 1 extra flame every level. If you're paying attention, you'll notice that the Julius mode characters are a reference to the characters playable in Dracula's Curse. Julius represents Trevor, Yoko represents Sypha, and Alucard represents, well, Alucard. There is a certain playable character that's missing. Now, if you glitch Soma into the Dark Lord Soma boss fight, the following 4 voice clips will play. Soma's saying, human. Which human character could it possibly be? That's not the only proof that Hammer was supposed to be a playable character. There's a full dialogue present in the code for his introduction in Julius mode. He also has an intro for the Soma boss fight. He tries to get Soma back to his senses, but Soma doesn't even respond to him. Speaking of which, both of Soma's forms have unused entries in the Japanese version. One says Soma who fell to the Demon King, while the second form says what was once Soma. We also have the option to see Soma's backside. I'm guessing he might have used this when he talked to someone, kind of like how Richter used his. More perceptive individuals will notice that Alucard uses a new dive kick sprite. In Symphony of the Night, it looked more like this. Dawn's dive kick doesn't come from nothing though. It's the kick you can use when you have a knuckle weapon equipped. The old dive kick still exists in the game code. Many players may be aware about how useless the werewolf soul is. Instead of being an attack, it's this little dash forwards. As it turns out, it was supposed to be one of those transformation abilities where you charge forwards with a soul. This sprite can be found in the code. I really don't get why they went from this to this pathetic dash. A stopwatch can be found within the Julius mode subweapons. We also have these gold clock hands. I guess they wanted to replace Soma's time stop for looking too demonic, especially in the hands of a Belmont. I feel like they could have just given it to Alucard though. After all, the stopwatch is the only subweapon he can use in Castlevania III. The Malphus enemy has 2 unused sprites, one with him upside down, and another with him as a raven. Looks like it would have been a cool way to mix up the boss fight. There are some leftovers of a frozen effect, kind of like in Circle of the Moon, as well as outlines for Alucard's stone animation, and not just one, even the gargoyle form too. In the end though, the Julius mode characters can't be stoned. Apart from some carried over assets, and some songs unfinished in the mobile version, that's about all for the game. Curse of Darkness has 306 unused pictures, as well as a bunch of unused entries. We of course have Dummy, but he doesn't matter. The entirety of the Garibaldi Temple has an entry, though it's just a placeholder. We have an entry for the first Trevor fight. See, you don't actually kill Trevor, and killing something is how you normally get its entry. You can only get him down about 1/6 of his first health bar. After that, a cutscene will play. The entry is actually different to the one you get after you fight Trevor for the second time. One talks about his fight against Dracula, while the other one talks about how he agrees to lend his strength to Hector. We also know how much health he has. On the highest settings and in boss rush crazy mode, he has 79,200 health. Comparatively, the Legion and Nucleus boss fight, who combined had the highest health in the entire series at the time, only had 15,775. Showing how absolutely bloated Trevor is. Also, the Trevor doppelgangers that you fight in Trevor mode also have their own entries. The Skullfish you fight alongside the Skeleton Diver also has his own entry. Abel has one too, who's one of Isaac's innocent devils. He only has 43,000 health, so I feel like Hey Frank Evans should try to kill him. The innocent devils you fight in his second fight also have their own entries. Their names are Black Dragon, Black Yeti, and Black Rossets. Black Yeti is weird since his name is actually translated properly. The one that Hector and the player can use is spelled I-Te, instead of just Yeti. I guess it could have been a cheap way to make the devil more original, but given that the other two devils' names are just the same as Hector's plus Black, it doesn't seem to be intentional. The Legion zombies actually also have their own entry. In the crazy mode boss rush, their levels actually surpass 99, instead being level 119, making them the highest level enemies in the entire game. The heal zones themselves have their own entry. It seems to be referring to the ones you get after beating a boss. While it could be the thing that the fairy familiar can spawn, that one is specifically stated to be a healing field, not heal zone. Phase 1 of Crazy Armor has its own entry too. In-game, only its second form has an entry, and only the second form has an image. These two Knight Armors have signatures on them, Phi 1 and Coca. Phi might refer to fight, but the meaning behind Coca is unknown. This single picture says, "Please do not use," which, given that this is the only unused entry to have this, seems oddly personal. Excluding the one we just saw, can you tell which of these Phantom Swords is not like the other? I'll give you a good second to guess. It's this one. I also lied, it's not even the Phantom Sword that's different, it's only the banner. The frame is mirrored. It's the only one of the 306 unused entries to have this. I don't know why, but he's special and I'm not gonna tell him any different. Parting from this Phantom Sword exclusivity, there were some names that the devs just could not allow into the main game. Names just too shocking for the PS2 users. Names like Roland, and Lauren, and Leopold, and is that Royal? These are fully functioning, auto-generated names for your innocent devil. A lot of them are found in-game, but these were removed from the name pool. We also have this object. It seems to be old text, which, if it works the same way as the ancient text in Lament of Innocence, it would give you game hints. There are 37 test chambers found in the game. I could only find footage of the first 7, found on Shademp's YouTube channel, and an image for another one. Map 0 consists of a long hallway, allowing you to run in one direction longer than any area in the game. Only the floor and the boundaries have collisions. Map 1 has a spectral sword that you can actually affect by pressing various buttons on your controller. You can make it walk, get hit, or even lie down. 2 finally has something you can really interact with, an enemy. Otherwise, it's just a floor with some boxes that don't work. Speaking of which, there's a whole bunch of them. I wonder what they would have used this for. Map 3 has the Spectre enemy again, and an odd floor texture. Given how flat Curse of Darkness is, Map 4 is more interesting from a platforming perspective than anything that actually made it into the game. Curse of Darkness basically has no changes in ground elevation beyond hills and slopes. Given that this is here, it's weird that this seems to actually just be a choice on the dev team's part. Despite how Map 5 looks, it's completely flat. Map 6 has no collisions at all. You'd fall right through the floor if you spawned normally. While I don't have Map 7, Map 8 involves this photo of someone from something. Given Hector's animation, I'm guessing there's no collisions. Portrait of Ruin has this weird leftover script that would cycle through every face graphic while repeating the words ka, ge, ma, sa mostly consistently. This has appeared in a few games already, but the MP max-up and HP max-up are coded in as inventory items. Like in Dawn, many alternate character attacks can be used by Jonathan and Charlotte. A lot of them don't work like they're supposed to, as in there are some graphical or some mechanical mistakes when put on Jonathan. It's cool being able to use the alternate attacks. Weirdly, Richter's whip does less damage than Jonathan's, though it does have better range. Jonathan can only shoot one of Maria's doves at a time. He can also use the Axe Lord Armor's puppet, though not his main attacks. By looking at the descriptions, we can see that many of Richter's attacks are taken straight from Julius. None of the Sisters mode attacks can be used, as they use the stylus. The game has 5 unused rooms, located in the Nation of Fools and its alternate version, the Burnt Paradise. They were most likely removed because they broke the area's symmetry. We have this unused graphic. Some people think it was supposed to be a mastered holy water sprite. It's actually used as a placeholder in the Portrait of Ruin prototype, replacing the skill cubes. You also can see a Laraji using an attack they can never use in-game, attacking directly forwards instead of at an angle. The sprites for this attack goes unused in the final release, there being 2 for if Laraji was on a wall. In the fake Trevor sprite set, there seems to be this unused tomahawk weapon. This probably would have replaced Trevor's axe, just like how this set of bones replaces Trevor's cross. There is also a fully functioning shield for the old axe armor. We talk about this unused dive kick in the Symphony of the Night section of this video. It's found in this game, but only gets used in Harmony of Despair. Unused code for a Richter dive kick exists in this game too. There are some hitbox properties, but they're fairly unpolished. Unlike in Harmony of Despair, it actually does use the startup animation. This sprite itself is still technically never used. He only has a kick at an angle, explaining probably why it was unused. They probably hadn't finished it in time. I didn't want to do it, so I just had Hey Frank Evans do the Order of Shadows section instead.
Hi. Order of Shadows pretty much has no information on it online. But after a bit of searching, I did find a couple things that could be classified as unused content. The first are these 2 songs that went unused, Imposing Wall and Coursing Grind. God knows why Imposing Wall was unused, since it's probably the best song in the game. Though I do understand why they left out Coursing Grind. I also found this blog entry that was posted a bit before the game released. This talks about how instead of having Desmond as the protagonist, they were planning on having a mage called Griff LaRue instead. Iga didn't like this, and suggested to integrate the Belmont clan more into the story. Their new character, Desmond, started out being more similar to Alucard. But the devs decided that they wanted a Belmont with the same appeal as characters like Trevor or Richter. And this is what they came up with. I'm sorry guys, I don't think that's happening. Anyway, that's all you'll be hearing from me. Be sure to like the video and all that, and I also have my own YouTube.
Okay, it's me again. The prototype for the Dracula X Chronicles has a model and some textures for Trevor. While a bit wonky, he has his own walking and standing animation, while the rest of his moves are taken directly from Richter. The cutting room floor doesn't seem to have actually confirmed this, but I'm pretty sure it's true. The Stage 1 theme for the DXC prototype doesn't actually play Divine Bloodlines. It plays the Stage 2 theme instead. The game files do have a version of Divine Bloodlines, but this is different from the one found in-game. Let's take a quick listen. This theme would appear in the DXC soundtrack. It's different from the original, which is probably why they removed it. In the Symphony of the Night port included in the game, by pairing a PS3 controller and clicking R3, you can access the debug menu. You have all sorts of options here, including one that I kinda recognize. Order of Ecclesia has an unused string for the Vampire Killer. What makes this notable is that this game is the only one in the entire series to not feature the Vampire Killer in any way. Like in the previous DS games, you can use your secondary character's attacks on your main character. In this case, having Shanoa using Albus's gun, Agartha. There's also text demonstrating plans for an easy mode, a mode that would have made the game more accessible for people who aren't good at games. There's also text for Gauntlet and Stoking Collar. It would be cool if you could customize your gauntlets and stockings. There's this interesting unused object. This gold spike brick is programmed to not only damage Shanoa, but other enemies. While this is rarely incorporated into Castlevania games, it's really cool when it is. It only does 1 to 3 damage to them though. Not to mention anything killed by this won't give you any XP. Shanoa's automation transformation has 2 alternate forms. These were probably leveled up versions of the glyph. These were probably scrapped fairly early on, as the sprite for the Terminator one isn't finished. Within the Shanoa graphics, Jonathan's legs managed to persist. Not really sure what he's still doing here. In Order of Ecclesia, you can find the tracks from the first Castlevania hidden across the game. The Game Over fanfare appears too. However, there's no way of making it play, even if you have a Castlevania track enabled. Given that there are some missing Castlevania 1 songs, the Game Over theme was probably meant to play in one form or another. There's an original track too. It may have to do with the heads of Cerberus you can collect across the game. After all, it's called Gate to the Underworld. Dying with Arma Felix was supposed to have an original animation. However, it being one of those transformation abilities, you just revert to Shinoa upon dying. The unused animation in the code is actually just the same one the cat person enemy uses. Given Shinoa's hair color, they probably would have changed it to having brown hair instead. On that note, it probably was scrapped pretty early. Shinoa has these, quite frankly, unhinged clips in the code.
I'll chop you to pieces. I'm not done yet. Not yet. Not yet.
They seem insistent on these, as there's also a second one.
I'll chop you to pieces. I'm not done yet. Not yet. Not yet.
I don't know what this was about. Maybe she'd say this to the crab? We also have an interesting one for Albus.
Keep it quiet.
He's telling Shinoa to keep quiet. This seems to imply that there was supposed to be an escape sequence alongside Albus in Order of Ecclesia. Parts of the Minerva prison island may be left over from this planned sequence. There's also this portrait for Shinoa. It's clearly unfinished. Off topic, but look at this from the English version in the sound test. Symphony of Battle, Dissonant Courage, Sorrow's Distortion, Lament of the Master, Chamber of Ruin, Order of the Demon. What's this Circle of the Moon slander? Like Lament of Innocence, Judgment doesn't have a page on the cutting room floor. Koji Igarashi did an interview saying that he initially planned to have a bunch more whip users in the game. He said, however, it wouldn't be a good idea to have so many whip users in a fighting game, cause there is no way a Castlevania game could work with only whips. Anyway, you can assume characters like Richter, Jonathan, or Julius would be playable. I probably could dig up more information, but I'm just so tired now. Castlevania the Arcade isn't really a big game to begin with. There's an unused skeleton enemy, which is forgettable. They probably just forgot to add him in the game because of how forgettable he is. I can't really tell if the stage select is actually used in the game since I've never played a legitimate copy. I'm going to include it since there's not much for this game, but I don't know. Anyway, all the online features like the secret character and the secret endings are no longer accessible, which is really a shame. I can't believe this was never ported onto the Wii. Despite the name, Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth is a completely original title. To start things off, the game has a couple of test rooms. You know that because this room says test. All the rooms are fairly short. The first one, shown here, is literally just a room. This second one has these freestanding doors. It also has so many enemies you'd think little Timmy made it. 3 is bland once again, meanwhile Dummy is all over the place. It's a trashed version of one of the rooms in Stage 3. It works fairly well, but it has these horrifying eyes watching you in the background. We have 2 unused enemies. It looks like there was a planned Medusa boss. It looks kind of awesome. We also have a 3rd version of the evil armor. This one seems to be going for the medieval knight look. We also have these triple daggers that I don't recognize from anywhere in game. Something really weird about this game is that it doesn't use a single song from Castlevania The Adventure. Battle of the Holy, Christopher's theme, only appears in the soundtrack. This and the other OST exclusive theme, Lost Painting, are thought to be what were originally planned to be the Stage 1 and 2 themes for the game. It's sad. This is the first game he's had any sort of appearance in for the past 18 years. He's not even in the Greatest 5 item crash, despite Simon getting a new original sprite. Before we move on to the next decade, I have one last thing to mention. There was a planned 3D Castlevania title for the Xbox 360 and PS3 by Koji Igarashi in 2008. It was cancelled quietly, and beyond a teaser trailer, the only thing we know about it is that it was gonna star Alucard.
Hammer!
The second original Castlevania mobile game, Encore of the Night, is a gem game that revisits the plot of Symphony of the Night. It was removed from stores in 2016. So technically, everything can't be used today. The game is incredibly obscure. I couldn't find much more about it. Harmony of Despair has a whole array of unused weapons. While I know what many of you may be thinking, no, not all of these are unused. Shields and the shield rod were planned to make an appearance. When used in unison, you'd be able to use a special attack, which differed depending on which shield you used. There was another gun planned for the game. Speaking of guns, there was a character that was scrapped for the game. This description states that he was a former military man who operated under orders to keep tabs on those with a connection to Castlevania. In his mercenary years, Hammer was codenamed Griffin, and commanded both respect and fear. He also has this character card. Weirdly enough, Simon and Fuma don't even have one of these. Crazy that Hammer got scrapped again. The Brachyura, the crab from Order of Ecclesia, has a string denoting its planned appearance. The unfortunate part is that this would have been the only boss originally from that game. The Coppelia enemy was planned too, but they're not that interesting. Some game images show that there's supposed to be 8-player multiplayer at some point, instead of just 4 for local and 6 for online play. The game has a bunch of funny unused voice clips.
Too bad I don't give a damn. Yummy. Ugh. Good grief. No problem.
There's also a whole bunch of hammer calls.
Hey, soldier!
Hammer!
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 Some voice clips show that there's supposed to be another dual crush for the stopwatch,
Time be still!
including some for characters that can't even use that item crash.
Thousand blades!
In the Xbox version of the game, Simon can shoot a fireball by inputting Hadouken. Due to a porting issue, this doesn't work in the PlayStation release. Despite that, you'll still use mana. It looks like Alucard's bat ability would have made a reappearance. Maybe this would have changed him from being budget Soma to something that's actually useful. It looks like Alucard's wolf form would have had this wolf blast. The cutting room floor page says that this was also found in the Sega Saturn port, but no one told me about that. Julius's Omnia Vanitas was supposed to have an original animation. In the actual release, Julius just uses his jump animation. A bunch of unused text shows that there was supposed to be a level up and stat max up mechanic for the game. Thrown in the trash. The Lords of Shadow trilogy doesn't have much content, so we're doing them all in one go. We have this dummy cutscene. I can't tell if the Gabriel Belmont section is actually part of the cutscene or if it's just the gray and yellow lines. More for Lords of Shadow 1, we have a few unused skill descriptions. There are 4 of the simple aerial attacks. I guess they were too simple to merit a description. First is the Air Direct combo, the one that does high damage but covers little area, and its inversion, the Air Area combo. We also have what looks like an unused boss. It looks like a dryad of some kind. The only information I could find on it was on the Castlevania wiki, whose credibility is dubious. As for Mirror of Fate, there was simply nothing I could find online. I have no skill in decompiling a game myself, so I can't really help there. Meanwhile, the one for Lords of Shadow 2 only talks about its debug menu. And on that disappointing note, we end the decade. The Canadian exclusive Castlevania game re-released for Apple Arcade in 2021. While the game is overall more complete, many old features are now missing from the beta. All multiplayer features have been removed, chat stamps included. That being said, Bounty and Duel Hunt are gone, having been replaced by dispatches. Multiplayer on the main campaign is missing too, as there is no local multiplayer features. Same goes with online exclusive enemies. Take the Great Ghost from Rondo of Blood, the one you could send after other players during Bounty Hunt. Aria of Sorrow Skeleton Boy is missing too. It would run upon seeing you, but if you managed to kill it, it would grant you a ton of points. Most gacha elements are gone, and aesthetically, the game has had a complete overhaul, which is great considering the old models looked kinda funky. The game has a whole array of unused bosses. These were meant to replace the normal mode bosses in hard mode. 2 of them managed to make it into the final game. The Giant Thunderbat, which was planned to replace the Giant Bat, actually appears in the Halloween event order. You can fight him if you manage to make it to floor 10. Meanwhile, Dullahan would be replaced by the Headless Frostman. He can be found in the Winter event order by making it to floor 40. Stage 3's boss, the Wyvern, would have been replaced by this Holy Dragon, whereas Stage 4's Legion would be replaced by Legion Saint from Harmony of Dissonance. We can actually find his texture for the chapter cover in the game code. Eligor would have been replaced by this Mecha Eligor for Chapter 5. For Chapter 6, Annette, Carmilla, and Lesser Vampire would have been replaced by Laura, Snow Queen, and Frosty. It doesn't look like Death would have been replaced. It's possible he'd just get powered up. Balor would have been replaced by the Balor subspecies in the Aria of Sorrow chapter. Gurgos' replacement is more up for interpretation. It looks like it would have been Beelzebub, though I don't know what he's doing in the Dawn of Sorrow grimoire. This would explain why Gurgos' chamber is so unnecessarily large. We actually get to see his model in one of the game's snapshots. I wonder what other hard mode bosses had models completed too. Other than not wanting to replace Death, the only explanation for him being in the Dawn of Sorrow grimoire that I could think of is because of the fight afterwards against Dark Lord Soma, in which Soma summons Gaibon and, well, a harpy. And in Symphony of the Night, the person replacing Gaibon in the inverted castle is none other than our Fly Guy. Or he might just replace Death and the strings are in a weird order. There's also Ifrit. He might have been a secret boss, but I like to think he was a third phase for Dracula's fight. After all, Dracula's fight takes place in the Dracula's Curse grimoire. There are only 2 phases in this game, despite Dracula's Curse having 3. To add on to this, prior to the 1.4.1 update, Count Dracula's second phase had the typical Phase 2 song, Black Knight, playing in the background. After 1.4.1, it was replaced by Big Battle. This is one of 3 songs to receive an original remix. Not to mention in Dracula's Curse, it's what plays in the 3rd phase of Dracula's boss fight. Given that this was the game's final update, not including the bug fix for when the shops broke, the developers were clearly rushing to release Grimoire of Souls' ending. It's very possible that Dracula was planned to have a third phase, but it was probably scrapped due to time and money constraints. After all, from what we've seen, songs are some of the things completed earliest in development. Now we get on to this finicky guy. As you can see from the title screen, Soma is depicted, despite not being a main character. You see, there are two kinds of characters in Grimoire of Souls. Main characters with a ton of freedom, and alter arts, which are fairly restrictive. Soma is an alter art, but it seems he was planned to be a playable character initially. Alter arts were expanded upon from what they were in the beta release, having been measly EX skills. These were characters that could use one giant attack, and then were sent away. There was no definitive evidence that Soma was supposed to be playable in the 2019 release. After all, the meaning of official claims are often lost in translation. Unfortunately, the 2019 beta ended its services the day before Soma was planned for release. As mentioned, when the game returned, Soma became an alter art, which, while more than an EX skill, was still the same type of character as Jonathan or Richter, not a main character. But that's not all. In the 2021 release, none of the dialogue was changed. While talking about summoning Trevor, Lucy notes how Trevor wouldn't be able to fight like Simon can. Soma will then retort, so like Richter and the others, he'll only be able to exert his limited powers for a short period of time. Instead of talking about himself, he mentions Richter and the others. He clearly isn't referring to himself, despite in this game being the exact same thing. Soma's saying he isn't like the others. He's better than that alter art trash. The game has a bunch of unused familiars. See, the familiars call the characters names that summon them. Naturally, only a playable character could do this. Now let's listen to the names they call. The only alter art that they call is Soma. Before the 2019 test in Canada, there was an earlier beta for the game. Here you'd unlock alter arts only after getting a character to level 30. Alucard unlocks Maria, Simon unlocks Trevor, etc, etc. If Soma was planned to be a character, who would he unlock? There isn't an unused character from the Sorrow titles found anywhere in the game files, is there?
Hammer! Hammer!
Hammer! Hammer! Hammer!
That's right, Hammer was once again planned but scrapped as a playable character for the game. That makes the third time this has happened, once again screwing over the dynasties. Oh, and there's some sound files for Mina too.
Mina! Mina!
As for what Soma's attacks would be like, it's currently unknown. Even the weapon he uses in the Apple Arcade release, the Clave Soulish, is just a reskin of Alucard's Nuada sword. Well, I guess you can argue it's obviously supposed to be the same weapon given it has the same description, but this still doesn't really help us. There's something that the devs actually forgot to remove from the beta. Common abilities were supposed to be abilities that all characters shared, usually like status effect resistances. When they removed it, they forgot to take it off the UI, so it just sits there now. Since I mostly skipped over these, let's go into the familiars in more detail. We can see that the Bat familiar, the Fairy familiar, and the Sword familiar were planned for the game. On top of the Fairy familiar having some, the Sword familiar has some voice clips as well. Trevor's EX skill seems to have been changed. Now his super attack thing is Grand Cross, when, in the beta, his EX skill was Destruction with the axe. Another notable aspect about this showcase is that we could see the Bat familiar in action. Anyhow, that's not the only EX skill that was lost. Albus's Omega Shot has been dissected into different moves. Of course, this does make sense, as he now has access to Optical Shot and Max Shot, which I prefer, and Maria's 4 Sacred Beast Healing has now been changed into 4 different attacks, now having access to Suzaku, Genbu, Senryu, and Byakko. And that's what we have for the last Castlevania game to be released. Castlevania Moonlight Rhapsody was supposed to be the second Castlevania mobile game this decade, though as of now, it's thought to be either cancelled or in severe development hell, as even the main director has been removed from the project, though I guess other Castlevania projects have survived much worse. A beta released online a while back. It was basically Grimoire of Souls, but the gacha elements were on steroids and it took place in a map more similar to Symphony of the Night. The only character you could play for free was this individual named Elvis, though apparently his name's supposed to be Eve. It features a more erotic art style, basically the same cast as Grimoire of Souls, and a new cast of enemies. Quite frankly, I'm not all that disappointed in its cancellation, though I wish its budget had been replaced into improving Grimoire of Souls instead. After all, that game showed a lot of promise. It was planned for more paywalled characters to release, and for there to be all sorts of new areas. Not the greatest way to, as of now, end the franchise. Wow, we've gone a long way. My voice is almost gone too. Congratulations to Brandon Green 4439 for finding all the names of my 6 innocent devils in my Curse of Darkness challenge. I'm sorry it took you 6 hours to find one of them. Let's show our respects to Hammer for being the most unused character in the franchise. While Castlevania's future is uncertain, there's always new things to find in what already was. Before anyone gets mad at me in the comments, this video is not an absolute list of all the unused content in the Castlevania series. Just a cool video I made to showcase the cool stuff I found. I hope you enjoyed it. I did the best I could. Thanks to the members of the Castlevania PS2 community for helping me make this video. And for those for Castlevania 64. Also, this game seems to have been taken apart by like 4 guys, which is kinda crazy. Anyone can find which game is featured in another section with the farthest separation between release dates. You'll get a shout out in the next video. This video was really painful to make, but of course, nothing stops the sacrifice from suffering another night.